Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of October 8th, 2023. Today, we have a conversation in store for you about one of the most historic documents of our movement, even though it is a recently published document. I think it is justified to make that characterization of it. That is the Dublin Longevity Declaration. As of today, over 1,400 people have signed this document at dublinlongevitydeclaration.org, and you can go to that website as well and sign it yourself. And we have an illustrious panel of both U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and guests, notable signatories of the Dublin Longevity Declaration, with us today. So first of all, we have Dr. Aubrey de Grey, who is the president and chief science officer of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, and one of the two principal authors of the Dublin Longevity Declaration. We also have with us David Wood, who is the executive director of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, and he was integral to the launch of the Dublin Longevity Declaration. We have notable signatories of the declaration with us, Dr. Bill Andrews, who is the founder and CEO of Sierra Sciences, Liz Parrish, who is the founder and CEO of BioViva. We also have Charlie Cam, who is our U.S. Transhumanist Party Director of Marketing and 2020 U.S. presidential candidate. Among our officers, we have Ramon Garcia, our Director of Visual Art. We have Ben Ballweg, our Director of Longevity Outreach. And we have in our YouTube chat Jason Geringer, who is our Legislative Director, as well as David Shoemaker, who is our Director of Applied Innovation. So welcome to everyone. And we have Daniel Tweed, our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential candidate, also a signatory to the declaration. So many notable, distinguished individuals today ready to discuss this pivotal document. So let's now hear from one of the main co-authors, Dr. Aubrey de Grey, about what motivated the Dublin Longevity Declaration and how it has been impacting our community thus far and hopefully impacting the world.
Yes. Thank you so much, Gennady, for arranging this and for asking me to speak. Yeah, I mean, I have a very good feeling about this declaration. The inspiration for it, which really came from another of the main people in AEV Foundation, Martin O'D, who is the vice chair of the board. The motivation was that it could be that we've got far enough along in the various labs around the world that are working on the biology of aging to be able to convince a reasonable majority of the mainstream academic community in the longevity space that they can say more optimistic things than they ever have before about the likely time frame for progress and indeed the likely magnitude of that progress. This, of course, is something that I've had on my mind since the dawn of time. Indeed, it's the main reason why I specified a particular milestone for laboratory work called robust mouse rejuvenation as like a goal to be aiming for in terms of postponing the health problems of late life in mice. And of course, that goal is one that we are very aggressively working towards at LEV Foundation right now. But the idea was that, there's a certain level of progress that needs to be made that will give people with faculty positions and, grants to get and asses to cover, give them, like, if you like, permission to say optimistic things rather than being terrified of being seen as overpromising with the risk of under-delivering. And it seems that this was true. It took absolute genius wordsmithing from Brian Kennedy to bring it off. And so, again, that tip to Martin for working with Brian early on before I was substantially involved. Brian wrote this extremely well-judged text that really hits the sweet spot. That like has it's audacious but not too audacious. And sure enough, the overwhelming majority of luminaries that we then approached, asking if they would be willing to sign, said yes. And most of the ones who said no basically did so on general principles that they've kind of, taken a vow never to sign anything of any kind whatsoever. So, this was perfect. And of course, the goal here is not to just speak within the echo chamber of the longevity community, but rather to get out there and show the world that this is important. Some people have said that, they would have liked to have seen some kind of specific call to action in this document, analogous to, for example, what the AI community did several months ago now when they called for a 6-month moratorium on AI research. We decided that that was actually not the way to go, that the right way to go was for this to be a kind of fulcrum that could leverage other calls to action. In other words, what it would do would kick away the main basis for not paying attention to calls to action, like, let's spend $3 billion on longevity research in order to get, some postponement of aging. That response is, of course, well, how do you know that if we put this money in, we have any chance whatsoever of getting any progress? People have been basically stuck in the mindset that's existed since the dawn of civilization that says, aging is not a disease, it's not amenable to medical intervention, it's woven into the fabric of the universe, and so anyone who pretends otherwise is just basically grandstanding and not really saying anything scientifically valid. We now have, and it was possible to say that when really it was only me, or even when it was only me and, a small number of other experts out there saying, we have a chance in the foreseeable future. Now we have a huge number of luminaries doing this. If you look at the signatures, you'll see that the top 60 or 70 of them are almost all professors or professor level senior academics in the biology of aging. And as such, simply, even if each one individually could be ignored, collectively, there's no way then it can be ignored. So now anyone who goes out with a call to action of any kind to work harder to hasten the defeat of aging can point to this document as the hardest, most ironclad, cast iron evidence you could possibly imagine that says this is not a pipe dream anymore. That's the fundamental purpose and motivation of this document.
Yes, thank you very much, Aubrey, for this overview. And what could you tell us about some of the signatories, some of the notable signatories of the Dublin Longevity Declaration, as well as whether it has been possible in the past to get the vast majority of the researchers on biological aging to agree to any sort of statement, much less a statement of this magnitude?
Yeah, well, okay, let me deal with the second of those things first. Of course, it's always a judgment call, have we reached the point where, where people will be willing to say this or that? I think, I can't say that we would not have been at that position a year ago. I can say with some confidence that we would not have been at that position 5 years ago. The amount of progress that's been made in that time, especially in relation to late onset interventions in the laboratory, as well as the private sector side of things, moving things into clinical trials, even if so far only early stage clinical trials by and large, these are, each individual component of that means perhaps not all that much, but collectively they add up to what I think everybody in the field recognizes as a sea change in where we actually are, and therefore in where we have some good chance of being in the foreseeable future. So I think that's really, I think the timing, we did it pretty much as soon as we could. And I'm very pleased about that. In terms of the people who've signed up, well, of course, if you look down the list, especially the first dozen or so, these are all really household names in the field. People like George Church and David Sinclair and Vadim Gladyshev and Vera Gorbanova and so on. This is the kind of thing that you just can't ignore these people. But I absolutely feel that we need two things that we don't yet have. Number one, we need people with enormous scientific credentials who are not necessarily within the biology of aging, but within biology generally. And, most obviously that means Nobel laureates. So we're trying to get those involved. There are a couple of Nobel laureates who are working in aging, especially in the area of telomeres, of course, and we've approached them. But there are other people who are working more in regenerative medicine or other more tangential areas. And of course, everyone is welcome. And the more we can get of those, the better. And the other thing that we need is simply larger numbers. At the moment, I'm very happy that we've got 1,400 people already after only a few days, but the momentum really, hasn't really got going yet, because what we need is this to be exponential. And that will happen when more and more media outlets start to pay attention, when more and more people start to be able to use essentially herd mentality or fear of missing out or whatever to get people involved who haven't really thought about this as much as they should have done until now.
Yes, indeed. And we do hope that this momentum will accumulate. One aspect of this is, of course, for everybody watching this stream, if you haven't done so yet, go to DublinLongevityDeclaration.org/#sign and sign it, and make sure you verify your email address afterwards. So you will receive an email with a link to verify your email address. That is a necessary prerequisite for your signature to appear. And if you've signed it already, but you don't see your signature on the list, make sure you undergo that verification step. So now I would like to go to David Wood, the executive director of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, and have him share his thoughts on the Dublin Longevity Declaration and what he hopes will arise from it.
You're muted.
Thank you, Gennady. It's still very early days with the declaration. Only 5 days, I think, since it's been launched, and already huge numbers of people coming to us. But I think if we look back in several months' time, we're going to see much bigger ripples spreading from this. We've had a few pieces of coverage in the press, an article in Forbes, an article in Lifespan.io, Longevity Technology and Fight Aging. I'm still waiting for other journalists to wake up and realize quite how significant this gathering of luminaries in agreement on a substantial piece of text. This is not agreeing on a single paragraph or two, it's agreeing sufficiently with significant analysis. And what I really like about this, it is a consensus document, as in the subtitle. It's a consensus of what people who have maybe different views as to priorities in particular research lines, nevertheless, they are able to all come together on this agreement. And there are some mischief makers who sometimes say, The field of aging is still split down the middle. It doesn't know what aging is. It's got different views. I say, on the contrary, there is a great deal of agreement that if we understand the damage that takes place at the cellular level and in the intracellular matrix, that is the place where a great deal of progress can be made. And so, yes, there are people who will prioritize studying different types of damage. There may be different views as to which damage types may be more fundamental. There's certainly lots of room to explore different possibilities for repairing the damage. There's different approaches to measuring the impact of the repair, different approaches to biomarkers, which are more significant and which are possibly misleading. But to focus on these differences is really to miss the point of this vast agreement between this number of longevity researchers. So that's all very encouraging. And there are clear calls to action in this document, that there should be more emphasis on a variety of new interventions, including combinatorial approaches and so forth. So I think we're going to look back at this in just a few months' time and be amazed at how widely the impact is spreading.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. And I certainly hope that within a few months' time, we will be able to have exactly that kind of reflection. And I also wanted to acknowledge our friend Mike Lazine, who just signed the declaration. So thank you very much to Mike. And if you sign the declaration just during the course of this stream, we'll be happy to publicly acknowledge you as well. So let us go to Dr. Bill Andrews, who is one of the leading researchers in the field of anti-aging and the biology of aging. So Bill, could you share your thoughts as to why you signed the Dublin Longevity Declaration and what you consider the significance of it to be?
The obvious reason is that I personally want to live forever, and I want to do whatever I can to help Aubrey and Brian and Mark and everybody else to help me do that. So that's why I want to sign. But I was stunned by how well it was written, how thorough it was, how comprehensive it was. The fact that it covered practically everything about all the different approaches to understanding what aging is and how the approaches to try to solve the aging process. But I think that, Aubrey especially has done such a great job in the last, I want to say, 15 years now, just making the field acceptable, and making the field grow and stuff. And so I want to support all that as much as I can, because I believe in the same thing. So that's pretty much the reason. I just don't understand why anybody would not sign it. In fact, I would be curious if anybody has heard of anyone that gave a reason as to why they didn't want to sign this. And I think the only reason we only have 1,400 plus signatures is because it hasn't been circulated to enough people yet. I think it's a really excellent declaration. I just think it's going to really take off. I agree with whoever was talking. David was just talking. Yeah, about this thing's going to be years from now very, very significant. But if anybody has the answer to the question I ask about, is there anybody that has given a reason why they didn't want to sign it? I'd sure love to hear what that is.
Right. So yeah, I can answer that. So yes, there were, as I say, a few people that we asked from the mainstream community who said no. Of those people, no more than a dozen, I don't think. Of those, probably half said no. They said basically, I have, just sworn off signing anything. I think like I got into trouble signing something a long, long time ago, and I just don't sign anything anymore. I'm not even going to think about it. That's a position. The other half, there are a few people in the community, I'm sure we all know this, who just are very, very picky, and they won't sign anything unless they fully 100% agree with every single word of it. In fact, one or two people that we know probably wouldn't sign anything unless they wrote it. So, this is just like human nature. But as I say, a very small minority of people. As for people outside of the mainstream who may have been told about the document since it was launched and everything, yes, I would love to know the answer to that question as well. And I completely agree about circulation. I mean, as we've already heard, there are people who Charlie mentioned Ray Kurzweil and Martin Rothblatt. You know, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they haven't heard about the declaration yet, because, you know, it takes a little time to get the word out to absolutely everybody. But that's what we're doing here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you know of anybody who would be sympathetic to the Dublin Longevity Declaration, please share it with them. Please share it with your circle of friends and acquaintances and family members, anybody who you think would be receptive. And I would say a large number of people within the mainstream of public opinion would be receptive to this declaration based on the way it is written. It is written to be both palatable to the mainstream as well as to radical life extension enthusiasts such as myself, such as many people within this panel, as well as many of our audience members. So it appeals to both constituencies, which is one aspect that makes it quite remarkable. Now let's go to Liz Parrish to hear her thoughts on the Dublin Longevity Declaration.
Oh, thanks for having me. I was really excited to read it. Again, it's a well-written document, and I think that it's a consensus of what most of us believe to be absolutely and inherently true, and what's needed to move the technology forward for the patient. And that's crucial. And I think that it also will have a good deal of benefit towards unsiloing. I'm not sure if that's a word, the area of life extension. I think that one of our big problems, and I've seen this in the last few conferences, is everyone is getting very hung up on biomarkers not telling the entire story of aging. It's because each one of those biomarkers is looking at one part of aging. And this document opens up the conversation for combinatorial therapies, which has been the focus on my side since the beginning, which is actually fresh and young compared to the other signers of the document. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate anything that is an art. It's beautifully written. It is truthful, and it bridges the gap between where medicine started, which is definitely in life extension. All medicine outside of euthanasia is based in extending a healthy lifespan, to the technology that will bridge it to the future. So thank you, Aubrey.
Yes, and thank you, Liz, for signing it and for so eloquently expressing your reasons for signing it and your impressions of the Dublin Longevity Declaration. And now let's go to our friend Charlie Cam, who I think is one of the foremost enthusiasts of radical life extension. He even ran on that platform for President of the United States in 2020. So Charlie, what are your thoughts?
I did run on that, and there's still debate on who won that election. So, you know, me and Liz may still be turning out to be the vice president and president. Look, it's amazingly written, and what Aubrey and all the people in that world are working on is actually the most important issue of our lifetime, of any time that's ever existed. The idea of not dying is so important that I think this kind of document, I'm glad it's been written now. It probably should have been written a long time ago, but as Aubrey said, that maybe this is the time where most people will finally come around to understand it and sign it. And also, as Aubrey said, we want to get more people. And I've got a lot of thoughts on how we can do that. I will actually write to you, Aubrey, offline about some of the things that we can do to generate a huge swath of the population because, you know, yeah, we can get Ray and Martine for sure. But, you know, getting people outside of our inner group, so to speak, is a little trickier, but it's doable. And I think that's something I want to really help get that going on. So congratulations on writing such a provocative and brilliant paper along with your colleagues. And let's see what we can do.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, Charlie is our director of marketing for the US Transhumanist Party. So he knows marketing very well. He knows outreach very well. And he has a lot of notable individuals whom he can count as friends. So that's wonderful, Charlie. Thank you. And our friend Sergey Gubkin, longtime viewer of our virtual Enlightenment Salons, has also signed the Dublin Longevity Declaration. So thank you very much to Sergey for contributing his signature. And Zack Varkaris is here as well. Of course, you know Zack Varkaris of Austin Biotec as a frequent panelist, guest of honor on 2 of our virtual Enlightenment Salons. So Zack, could you please talk about why you signed the Dublin Longevity Declaration and your thoughts about it?
Well, it always takes visionaries to, thank you for that, Gennady. It takes visionaries to come up with something like this, which Aubrey is. And being Greek, of course, I like it when he mentions Greeks in there, because you can't go wrong with that. And then also there's an extra 5 years extension of human health span. And a lot of what we work on is offering women another 10 years of extra life from being fertility fit. So this is fantastic. It's brilliant. I've signed it, and I'll be sending it out to everyone I know, doctors, panelists, charities, anyone I know, everything, every medium that I'm on, and I'll send it out, and as much promotion as possible, because this is the way forward. We have to take the bull by the horns and make it happen rather than just talk about it. And this is what we're doing. So it's brilliant.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much to Zack. And our friend and U.S. vice presidential candidate for the Transhumanist Party, Daniel Tweed, writes, "It took an eloquently written declaration to ignite another revolution. This time, we're coming for independence from the empire of death." I like that, Daniel. Thank you very much for those eloquent words. And we also have joining the panel Bernard Siegel, who was a previous guest of honor on one of our virtual Enlightenment Salons, and he is the co-founder of the Healthspan Action Coalition, also a pivotal figure behind the scenes and helping make this launch a success. So, Bernie, if you're able to share a few words about why you signed the declaration, why you support it, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Gennady. It's brilliant, first of all, and it makes all the difference in the world when you think about the communities of patient advocates and patients that are suffering, whose lives are, her lifespan is shortened because of their lack of medicine, their lack of scientific research to cure and treat their diseases, and nothing works better than a moonshot. So this is a revolutionary document. It has the potential to change the world. We have some of the most brilliant researchers on the planet having joined this, and we're scratching the surface. I can't say that I am astonished at how it's caught on. I'm not astonished, but I am pleased. I am so pleased that it's not just a narrow part of our communities, but the broader community. It's a global document, and it is going to change the world. So, and I appreciate Aubrey and the groups that are supporting this.
Yes, absolutely. And let's make sure that this document does have the broader reach that is intended so that it can indeed change the world. Now let's go to Ben Ballweg, our Director of Longevity Outreach. So Ben, this is perhaps the most important longevity outreach document in a long time. So what are your thoughts regarding it?
I think I wanted to just maybe ask a question that hasn't already kind of been commented about. What is the timing when we reach out to Dylan and we say, hey, Dylan at A4LI, is now the right time to share this with the Longevity Science Caucus to really motivate some action to get our platform into the halls of Congress. I don't know if Aubrey, you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. So I'm actually going to be meeting with both Dylan and Sonia Arison, who is the chair of the board of A4LI, on Tuesday, and that's very much going to be on the agenda. I want to get their sense. They have a much better sense than me because they understand politicians, and especially American politicians, much better than I do. I want to get their sense of what the timing ought to be. It may very well be that it shouldn't all be done in one go. For example, as I'm sure you know, and most people here will know, there was some legislative success in Montana a few months ago where there was a new act passed that enhances and broadens the right to try in a very important way. And the state senator who led that, Ken Bogner, is kind of the kind of person who may very well feel that it's politically appropriate to get involved now. Incidentally, while I'm on the subject of Ken Bogner, let me just mention that he is going to run next year for regular Congress, federal Congress. And obviously that means that he's in the early stages of raising money to do so. But the point about Ken, obviously, is that he has the distinction of having led some actual change in legislation, which nobody else has in the country at this point. The Congressional Caucus consists of, I believe at this point, 6 or possibly 8 federal Congress people who potentially have considerably more clout than Ken does as of now. But of course, as with any position in politics, clout is a double-edged sword. The more you have to protect it and not do things that might make you enemies. So I don't have a sense of whether now is the right time for them to be going out, or indeed for Dylan himself to be asking them to go out and put their names publicly behind this. And I'll be very interested to hear what he and Sonia say on Tuesday.
Yes, thank you very much, Aubrey, for that insight. And for anybody who wants to read the Montana Right to Try Act, which was Senate Bill 422 in 2023, you can find the text of the official enrolled bill right here on the screen. And Aubrey, it's interesting that you pointed out that clout can be a double-edged sword. I've often observed this, that people who seem to be famous and influential and powerful and wealthy sometimes don't have as much room to maneuver as one might think from the outside, because they're beholden to so many, let's say, interests that could adversely press on them if they say or do something that departs from the mainstream too far. What are some ideas or insights that you might have on how to influence their thinking? This is a similar question to the one I addressed to Brian Johnson at Longevity Summit Dublin. He is one of the signatories of the declaration and perhaps the highest net worth individual to have signed the declaration, but he is very much an outlier among very high net worth individuals, and that he is very overt about his intention not to die, and he wants to start a broader movement for that purpose. But I think he himself may still be struggling a bit in trying to get his fellow high net worth individuals to be of the same mindset. But what are some of the factors that affect how these people would think and when they would be ready to take that leap to accept a position that might previously not have been mainstream?
Yeah, so high net worth individuals are kind of a special case of the kind of people that we're talking about here, because yes, they care about what other people think about them. Some people care more than others about that. But at the end of the day, they can make their own decisions because it's their own money. And they sometimes don't like to be influenced by each other. I'll tell you that. I often find that high net worth people are rather reluctant to take each other's advice on this, even though in practice there is a certain amount of herd mentality. But really, I think it's not just the high net worth individuals we need to be looking at here. It's the opinion formers. So the question is, how does one get to be, Joe Rogan or Oprah Winfrey or Mr. Beast? The way one does it, I think, is by paying close attention to trends, to actually, seeing a trend that is becoming mainstream before it's quite got there, and getting ahead of it, and like positioning oneself in a leadership role and an opinion forming role, even though really one is not the pioneer. And that is perhaps the extreme example of what I'm talking about like not really being influenceable in and of oneself, but rather taking one's cue from the wider world. And of course, it's true at many other levels. So I always used to make fun of David Sinclair by saying, like, it took him 11 years longer than it took me to write a general audience book saying we should do something about aging. But of course, the point is, this is not because he's less courageous than me. It's because he has the misfortune to have a professorship at Harvard. And if he'd written that book the same year I did, he probably wouldn't have had it for very long. So that's the kind of thing we have to look at. We have to put ourselves in the position of each individual, whether it's a high net worth person or a politician or academic, and we have to ask, what permission do they need? What would it take for them to feel able to come out and say things publicly that they're not currently saying?
Yes, indeed. And if anybody else has insights about how these influencers or high net worth individuals or politicians or anybody who has a substantial impact on the culture could be swayed to embrace a document such as the Dublin Longevity Declaration and make it part of their messaging, please share those ideas either now or later. I'll open up the floor to anyone who wants to make a statement on that. Let's see. And that's a subject we can return to later, but David, please go ahead.
So the good news is that the document already is strong, but not too strong. So most politicians, most influencers should be comfortable with almost the entirety of it. It's making claims that may raise some eyebrows, but only a little bit. So I think that's already well positioned. But I echo your call, Gennady. If there are people listening who feel that they have insight into how to use ideas in the document, how to illustrate ideas in the document, how to turn parts of the document, the declaration, into videos, poetry, or anything else, then please use your own creativity. And I've already seen people doing their own pictures based on what we've included in the declaration. I like the picture that was on longevity technology, illustrating the article by Eleanor Garth, and it showed a different kind of a group of people declaring that there was something important going on here. So if there are people listening to this who have their own ideas that they wish to share, then please do get in touch, or please just go out there and try it yourselves. And don't mind if we copy you or link to you if it is successful. So we can do this together more than we can do that just as small individuals.
I've thought of 6 people I can email during this broadcast so far, and I'm pretty careful about not alienating people that I know. So if you all can think of someone that might hear the message of please sign this is definitely worth considering, and not get them upset with you for being too proselytizing toward them or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a key component of the conversation that everyone needs to have if they're trying to get other people to do this is, rather than looking as though one's putting pressure on the other person, simply giving them the information that for the first time ever we have this large number of utterly uncompromisingly mainstream credentialed scientists signing up to this. In other words, there is no fringiness about this whatsoever. That's something that your average person is going to need to be told. That's the thing to lead with, I think.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is a document that is intended to be as palatable to the mainstream as any declaration can be. And hopefully your friends and neighbors who haven't heard very much about longevity science might even be intrigued to read this document and will understand it and will be motivated to sign it. By the way, the article that David mentioned about the Dublin Longevity Declaration from Longevity Technology can be found here. It is quite a well-written article, so I would encourage everyone to read it as well. And furthermore, if you have access to media outlets, either as a writer for those outlets yourself, or if you know someone in that position, please make sure that they cover the Dublin Longevity Declaration. I think that would help tremendously in broadening its reach. And now I would like...
Before we go on, just let me interrupt for a moment and mention that actually it's just been brought to my attention that Brian Johnson is not the most high net worth person on the list, because I actually had overlooked this, but Michael Grieve signed up a little while ago. I must move him higher up the list, I think. I'm pretty sure he's worth more than what Brian is at this point.
Yes, Michael Greve of the Forever Healthy Foundation in Germany, also a longtime supporter of the longevity field and of various enterprises within it. So this is quite encouraging. And now I would like to invite Art Ramon Garcia to share his thoughts on the Dublin Longevity Declaration, why he signed it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that 5-year increase in health span. And I'm thinking I'm probably going to create some memes. I've been practicing creating memes, so I can create memes to spread awareness of the declaration. But one thing that I haven't heard mentioned much is, suppose in a decade, the therapies are out, but I'm having to fight my insurance company to get them to pay for it. So, how about getting this in front of the insurance industry right now so that, they start to understand, the benefits of increased health span and how that's going to save money and, get them to be receptive to it when these therapies get approved by the FDA. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, health insurers are in this rather curious position, being, obviously one part of the medical system, the medical industry. At least some of the larger medical insurers are already highlighting, the usefulness of prevention, but of course not necessarily into the preventative medicine. And so there's a step to go there before they start to put effort into supporting the development of preventative medicine that doesn't yet exist. The difficulty there is that the whole system has to work in favor of that, to get these medicines developed, to get them approved, to get them prescribed, as well, and then of course to get them reimbursed. These things, all have to move in parallel, and that's not easy to make happen.
Yes, and from my experience, insurers tend to be some of the more conservative in terms of adopting new messaging or responding to emerging trends. Generally, they like to see other industries and mainstream public opinion get to that point first, because a lot of them are quite risk averse. And it's a different mentality from those of us who wish to propel a field forward. It's more of a reactive mentality in many cases, but it is one that I think could be influenced by enough success for a document such as the Dublin Longevity Declaration. And Bernie Siegel pointed out in our private chat that the Healthspan Action Coalition has endorsed the Dublin Longevity Declaration and is issuing its national press release tomorrow, which is also quite hopeful because the Healthspan Action Coalition has gathered a large number of organizations, quite well-known organizations, both in terms of research and advocacy, that are part of the coalition now, and therefore word will spread. Now, I also wanted to point out a comment from 50 OAS, who writes, anti-aging will be a boon to health insurers. It certainly will. The key is how to get them to recognize it and when will they recognize it. And I think various other industries, as well as general public opinion, will probably need to recognize that first. And then the health insurers will come along. That's my impression of how these dynamics work. And then Daniel Tweed points out in the chat that making sure that we say healthy longevity instead of simply longevity will also help our cause to a large extent. And I think the Dublin Longevity Declaration does a great job at that, because in the initial few paragraphs, it points out that a lot of people have focused on health span instead of lifespan because they worry about situations where people might live longer, but in an increasingly frail and diseased state. And what the declaration then points out is that it should be possible to extend health span and lifespan simultaneously. They're not antagonistic, they're complementary. And this is, I think, a major insight that people need to be aware of. I think using terms like healthy longevity does help to drive the point home. Now, there is a comment from one of our viewers from a biologist friend of his, and he related that comment. And essentially, this friend wrote about the declaration that there is some sort of article that could leave a more serious impression, but I'm not sure what he means by that. So if you could clarify what sort of article your biologist friend thought would leave a more serious impression, just in your comments in the chat, I think we can explore that. Now, I also wanted to ask, in terms of, let's say, on the ground activism, our friend Mikhail Batin of Open Longevity organized a demonstration yesterday in San Francisco. And Aubrey, I believe you were planning to attend that demonstration. Are there any news from that? What happened there? What you think the impact was?
Yeah, I went along. There are photos on social media already. You know, it was another kind of street event, very similar to the one that that we did a week earlier before the declaration was announced, that was focused on Longevity Day, because of course it was Longevity Day, the first. Yeah, I mean, it was just like we got a fair amount of attention from passers-by, but of course it was really a very small event. There were only half a dozen of us there, or maybe a dozen. So we just need more and more of these events all the time. But we did absolutely highlight the declaration, got people to pay attention to it. If you're doing that kind of thing, take along flyers or posters with a QR code on them. That definitely helps to send people to the right place.
Yes, indeed. And Mikhail is very good at making QR codes for all of us. He made one for the US Transhumanist Party as well. So if you need a QR code to help direct people to your website or to any sort of initiative that you are organizing, reach out to Open Longevity. Also, I would encourage everyone to watch our virtual Enlightenment Salon from last Sunday on International Longevity Day, where we featured demonstrations that occurred throughout the world, from Israel to Germany to Belgium to Spain to San Francisco, on the occasion of International Longevity Day. And Aubrey, as you said, you participated in the October 1st demonstration. We heard a few brief remarks from you last week, and then I think the phone battery died, and you were making a statement about Gandhi's words and their relevance to the longevity cause. I'm curious if you would be able to complete that thought for us.
Well, I can't remember exactly what I was saying then, but I've said similar things quite a few times before, so let me just do that. Yeah, I mean, of course, Gandhi said this famous thing about political change. He said, you know, first they ignore you, and then they ridicule you, and then they oppose you, and then they say they were with you all along. And various other people, especially in science, have said the same thing. Asimov said it. I think Arthur C. Clarke said it. Various people. So, of course, you know, this is kind of like almost a truism now. But the question is, where are we in that process at the moment? And we're at different stages in that process for different aspects of what we're trying to get through to people. You know, in terms of the academic community, we're pretty much at stage 4 when it comes to rejuvenation. In other words, the idea that damage repair is a plausible, in fact, possibly the most plausible way to postpone the health problems of late life. But we're very much not there with the mainstream community when it comes to longevity escape velocity, because I think even though, to my mind, longevity escape velocity is a totally inevitable consequence of getting even as little as 20 years out of rejuvenation. Nevertheless, a lot of our colleagues don't really want to think that way, at least the ones who are less mathematically inclined. But then if we talk about the wider world, of course, we again have the problem that the declaration is designed to address. We are very much still at stage 1 or stage 2 with the overwhelming majority of the general public. Either they haven't really even heard of the idea of addressing aging with medicine, or they think it's science fiction and they're just kind of ridiculing it and looking the other way. So this is the way to change that. And if we can get things to stage 3, where people start coming out publicly and saying that this is a bad idea, and saying it, you know, forcefully to, you know, on more high bandwidth global fora, then I would regard that as progress, even though obviously it's not the final story.
Yes, it seems that progress is going to be incremental, at least at first, though there may be an inflection point where enough people have signed it that some really big influencers come on board and bring millions of people overnight. At least one can hope for such an outcome. But we've brought one more person, our friend John H., who says the document has been signed, sealed, and delivered. Well, delivered to virtual space, I suppose. Let's hope we see his signature on the signatories page very soon. And now I also wanted to bring up a comment from Cryonics Star Explorers Club. And this comment, I think in terms of timelines, is a little bit off, because it says back about 25 years ago, Aubrey predicted success in beating aging by now. My impression was back in 2004, when I first encountered the SENS approach, Aubrey was providing his 50% probability estimate of achieving longevity escape velocity within 30 years. So that would have been circa 2034. And Aubrey, I would say your current estimate is not that far off. It would be around 2036 to 2038, if I'm correct.
All right, so let me do this. So yeah, in fact, I wasn't saying 30 back 20 years ago. I was saying 25. But indeed, I was talking about a 50% probability. And I was saying back then, as I am still saying, that the the chances of our not getting there and for 100 years are at least 10%. because of the so much that we that we don't know that we don't know. There's so many unforeseen obstacles that we may encounter. Nevertheless, a 50% probability is quite enough to be worth fighting for. And another piece of good news is that the slippage that has occurred, because you're quite right, at this point I say that we're within, let's say, 12 to 15 years of reaching that point. The slippage that has occurred has not occurred at a uniform rate during those 20 years. During the first 10 of those 20 years, from 04 until, let's say, 2013, 2014, we hardly made any progress at all. And if we ask, in what respect was I over-optimistic, I have to say that it was overwhelmingly in terms of the amount of money available to make progress, which I think slowed us down by at least a factor of 3 relative to what I was hoping for. But then in the subsequent 10 years, the most recent 10, there's hardly been any slippage at all in terms of my timeframes. I was saying maybe 20 years, 10 years ago, and now I'm saying, maybe I was saying 20 to 22 years, maybe now I'm saying 12 to 15. So we've only slipped a couple of years in the past 10 years. And again, that's actually largely because of money, because even though there is a lot more money in the field right now, it is very unevenly distributed, and there are things still falling behind relative to how they could be, I think, on account of lack of funding. But it's a lot better than it was in the previous 10 years.
Yes, thank you, Aubrey, for that clarification. And I am curious if you could give perhaps a 10th percentile estimate of a time frame when longevity escape velocity could be attained. This would be like a highly optimistic scenario if absolutely everything went according to the best case outcomes, like if we had unusually high amounts of funding, unusually rapid research progress. What do you think would be that kind of time frame?
Well, I never really think about that kind of question, because the best case scenarios are, again, dependent on enormously unknown unknowns. So, for example, we could get sufficiently strong AGI next year to essentially solve the problem overnight for us. But I don't know how that would actually work. So I don't really think about it. I think, I find that both in terms of my own personal motivation and in terms of my ability to motivate other people, it's better to talk about reasonable probabilities like 50% rather than outlandishly extreme optimistic probabilities.
All right, fair enough. And our friend Silver Fan writes, everyone please sign the Longevity Declaration. It's super easy. And lastly, spread the word. Indeed, I completely echo that statement. And our friend Didier Cornell points out that Dutch, German, and Spanish translations of the Dublin Longevity Declaration are coming, but he needs to let somebody verify those languages. So hopefully the translations will be of high quality and they will reach people who primarily speak those languages. Now, I'm curious also if anybody else is aware of initiatives to translate the Dublin Longevity Declaration into other languages as well, and whether you think there's an untapped market there. English, of course, is the most widely known language, and a lot of people who speak other languages as their primary languages will still understand English or be able to use Google Translate at the very least. But I'm wondering what people's thoughts would be on the impact of having this declaration available in many languages. Do you think that could dramatically boost the number of signatories?
I would say that Spanish is the main language we should be talking about that hasn't been mentioned yet. Of course, we have a number of extremely vocal and energetic members of our community who for whom Spanish is their first language. The most obvious of whom is Jose Cordero. And I think certainly, the sooner the better.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. The sooner the better, the more avenues we can get for the declaration to be read and appreciated, the better. And Didier also says that in French, the Dublin Longevity Declaration is already available. So this is good news, absolutely. Now, I'm also curious, for those of you who signed the declaration and then talked to anybody about it and gotten any feedback regarding it, what has that feedback been? Would anyone care to volunteer that in terms of just a gauge of public opinion or opinions of your acquaintances? Seems no feedback as such yet, apart from people saying, well, we would be happy to sign it, or they've already signed it. I think our friend Silverfan is going to provide some feedback as well. What do you think would be some of the most effective ways of reaching, let's say, ordinary people, people who aren't experts in biomedical science, people who might perhaps hear about the declaration by word of mouth if they're a friend of somebody who is involved in our community? But what about people who are just part of the general public who might not have prior ties to our community? What do you think would be the best media, like print, online, television, YouTube, radio? What do you think would work better?
I would say that by far the most important way is people with a large audience online. So one person who's already signed up is Vitaly Winter, who is a blogger, came to Dublin, did a lot of filming there with his husband, and they, these people, they have an audience of like 1 million subscribers on YouTube. So, people like that get out there and ask their flock to sign, then we could be making a difference. And the more of those people, the better.
Yes, I agree that that could be quite powerful. And any other thoughts about ways of reaching just ordinary people in the general public and the best channels by which to do that? I think, Zach, you had a comment in our private chat in terms of how they can relate the pain of aging to the current scientific methodology to the general public. Could you elaborate on that, perhaps?
Yeah, so basically, all of us on this panel know a lot about aging and the science behind it. And it's our job to explain that in a way that people can understand what we're saying, so that they can how they can relate to their everyday life. So instead of it's a very intricate stem cell research or procedure, it's like, if you do this kind of thing, this will help you improve your quality of life. And it's for us to simplify that message and very bite-sized chunks, and almost having little memes throwing out all the time, constantly going out to people who have large followings, not necessarily in this area, thinking it's slightly outside, say people who have come through cancer survival or something like that sort of area, whereby they're looking at something to give them meaning and purpose back to where they were in bite-sized chunks, and we just take that little piece of it. And that's what I mean by understanding the pain.
Yes, thank you very much, Zach, for that elaboration. And now Dan Elton has a question, and this hasn't been discussed yet. He is curious about what the proposed task force mentioned in the declaration would look like. And he states ideally there should be multiple task forces in each country. And he thinks ideally within the government. I don't think the declaration specifies whether it would be a government task force or a private task force, but any thoughts on the task force idea within the declaration?
Yeah, we haven't honestly decided. The idea is, as I mentioned at the beginning, the purpose of this declaration is not to be in and of itself a call to action, but rather to give strength to a variety of different calls to action. And, task forces are often the way to implement calls to action. If for example, some government says, yes, okay, I'm convinced we will put $3 billion a year, then someone has to decide how that's going to be spent. And the ideal would be that it should be spent, intelligently, but also rapidly. We have seen, of course, in the past year or two, examples which have been extremely encouraging and also less encouraging. So, for example, Impetus is a granting body that was set up only a couple of years ago with the goal of putting money out, of evaluating grant applications extremely quickly and indeed dispersing money very quickly. And that's what they have been able to do. And I am absolutely overjoyed at how well they've done it. A real shout out to them, especially to Lala Nuzna, who runs the whole thing, really. But they've got hardly any money. I mean, pitifully small amounts of money. So, that's really rather bad news. Whereas conversely, we've got Hevolution, who have $1 billion a year, or that's what they announced, and they are being extremely slow to figure out how to spend it. They keep saying they're ramping up, but we need to combine those two things. We need people with proper amounts of money to start spending them fast, and perhaps a task force is the best way to make that happen. But of course, you need to start by people making the decision to actually spend the money at all, and that's really what this declaration is trying to do initially.
Yes, thank you, Aubrey. Any other thoughts on the task force idea within the Dublin Longevity Declaration? If not, yes, David, please go ahead.
It's a bit like the declaration itself. We started slow and carefully and built up a consensus opinion amongst the initial group of people who were working on it. The task force is an idea that will also be developed carefully and slowly and then rolled out to more and more people once we have got a consensus on how it can be effective. So I would say watch out for more news on that. But there are a number of questions which deserve careful attention, and we want to get the best input from the most thoughtful scientists, experts on how can more funding be liberated? How can funding be targeted in ways that will produce decisive results more quickly? What are the possible interventions elsewhere, for example, on regulatory field that could have the biggest effect? Are there other reasons why things haven't gone faster, or what factors could make progress accelerate? There's a number of questions like that that are being discussed, and we will roll out that discussion to a wider group as soon as possible, but we don't want to jinx it by saying too much publicly too soon.
Yes, fair enough. Now we have additional comments in the chat. So this is Moritz Pohl, one of the signatories of the declaration, and he writes that Vitaly, I believe the reference is to Vitaly Winter, a prominent influencer on Instagram, has promoted the declaration as far as he has seen, and Moritz will urge him to do more, but he is just quite busy at the moment. So an example of an influencer who is on board with the effort.
Thank you, Moritz. Thank you, Moritz. If you can get Vitaly and Jacob to get me and Martin and Brian, or some of us online, to actually have a conversation with them on their channel, then that would make a huge difference. I understand it does take time, but it doesn't have to be a long conversation. We can do it in an impromptu way. So if you can try and get them to do that, that'd be wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Our friend Mike Lazine writes that if we could get some prominent minority influencers to share this declaration, that would be huge. And in his opinion, a number of individuals and minority communities would benefit from the declaration. And Mike writes further down that there are unfortunately some self-destructive habits within certain minority communities that the declaration would be effective in countering, because essentially it will provide hope that the problem of biological aging could be effectively addressed. And perhaps that will motivate more individuals to take good care of their health. I think there is some merit to that angle on it. Give people hope, give people the understanding that if they take sufficiently good care of themselves, they will live long enough to see the scientific advances that could take their longevity and health to the next level. It's the concept of multiple bridges toward longevity escape velocity that Ray Kurzweil and Terry Grossman had outlined. And we also have a suggestion from Jason Geringer, our legislative director and current vice chairman. If people on this panel were to agree to be guests on some popular YouTube channels, that would make for some good shows, and the panelists could literally answer any questions that people have. And certainly that is a good idea. I would be happy to speak about the Dublin Longevity Declaration in any venue. And of course, Aubrey has been doing this for many years himself as well. He will pretty much always agree to be a guest on a podcast or a show on YouTube. And I think that's good practice more generally. If somebody invites you to be a guest speaker, it's always a good idea to accept. And it's always a good idea to be honest and truthful about one's expertise, or if one's expertise is limited in some ways, be honest and truthful about that, but express the ideas that one believes in and the causes that one would like to see gaining more traction. So now we have a comment from Jude McLean. Aubrey rocks. Thank you to Jude. And also, I think it's important to consider essentially what current supporters of longevity there are who might not have signed the declaration yet, but who you think might be sympathetic. So look at the list of signatories, see if you can't find somebody there, and reach out to them. Jason also writes that he loves how David Wood explains matters. David has a great narrator voice, and he would like to see an audio version of the declaration. David writes that an audio version has indeed been discussed, potentially with multiple narrators, reflecting the notion of consensus. So that would be a great idea. If we develop it, we could even stream it during a future salon or other public event to get more exposure to the ideas in this document. So thank you very much for all of those comments. And there are apparently some people who have signed it, but they think that perhaps they would go further themselves in the messaging. And Silverfan pointed out that there was one prominent person in the longevity community who signed it, but thought that it gave too much room to counter arguments and incrementalism. However, he did sign it. So there is that. And I think one of the benefits of this document in terms of also attracting the supporters of radical life extension who would prefer stronger language is that the more incremental language doesn't conflict with the stronger language. So you can move in the desired direction with this document in terms of
I just want to say I sympathize. you can't please everybody, you know. As I said, some people, you know, would never sign anything unless they'd written it themselves because they're very picky indeed about such things. And so I again want to really applaud Brian, who essentially wrote the first draft of the document and essentially set the tone of it, and managed to do so in a manner that seems to please as many people as possible, as much of the time as possible, even if we can't please all the people all the time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that, Aubrey. And we also have a comment from Carlos Nato, who points out that all people who are associated with cryonics are potential supporters for this declaration. And he says that in his view, many famous people have signed up for cryonics. It hasn't actually been that large of a number. There are a few thousand people signed up for cryonics worldwide and a few hundred who have been cryopreserved already. But there have been some famous stories of individuals who did get cryopreserved, like Ted Williams, the famous baseball player. But for now, it's still a small field, but it has a loyal support base. And I do think there is an affinity between cryonics and rejuvenation. So I do think it's a great suggestion to get more cryonicists to sign the Dublin Longevity Declaration. Jason Geringer has volunteered to help with art and video clips. Thank you very much, Jason, for offering that support. And Jude McLean has a question. I think this may be worthwhile to discuss here. What do you think we can do to push back against Elon Musk's pro-death messages, especially in the context of the Dublin Longevity Declaration? Because this is a document that I don't think Elon would be 100% opposed to, even with his ill-informed comments about longevity research. I don't think he would say, no, under no circumstances will I sign this document. And is there room to kind of sway him in a more pro-longevity declaration if the Dublin Longevity Declaration gets more traction? Any thoughts on that? David?
The first point I would say is that we are pro-choice. We want people to have the choice. Are they going to live long or are they going to be bored? If people honestly think they're going to get bored, there's no obligation to keep taping the therapies and the interventions. So that's the first thing. And again, a second level of argument may be that if some people choose to live long, it's somehow going to be bad for the planet or bad for culture because there'll be too many old people who will be clogging up all the positions and young people won't have a chance to get in. So there might be a problem there, but I see that as a much easier problem to cope with than the terrible problem of so many people being cut short long before they are willing to do so. So let's say allow the people in the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years time to figure out new ways to structure society if necessary so that there is fluidity. Just like the US president has to step down after 8 years, despite in some cases being in the peak of health, there are mechanisms to solve these problems that we can consider, and far better to address what is clearly a terrible problem, which is the growth of infirmities and all the healthcare costs associated there. But we shouldn't push these questions away too hastily. We should take the time to engage, try and understand what are the considerations behind the questions in some cases. And it may be that many people may present a bit like diseases. You know, people may present with the same symptoms, but underlying the symptoms are different biological causes for the disease. In the same way, people may come with the same questions. What about the lack of a turnover of culture if people remain alive too long? Then we have to dig a little bit more deeply and figure out what's actually on people's minds. And I think there are some starts to that conversation inside the declaration. The declaration does look at some of these issues as well, and we're more than happy to have that conversation.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, David. And Bill, you liked David's response. Any elaboration on that?
Well, I do believe that it's pro-choice. And I did read a comment that the solution to how to respond to Elon Musk's pro-death statements is to ignore them. Because when you don't ignore them, you only make his statements more prominent. But yeah, it's like, and I agree with David on the fact, and I say this all the time, it is, in some of my books I said it's nothing as bad as what we have now. Every time somebody talks about how the future is going to be terrible if we cure aging, they're just not aware of how bad things are now. And I also say that humans have the ability to survive whatever hits them. And the best example is the World Wide Web. When, for those of us that are old enough to remember when that was first thrust upon us, we all thought, what a terrible thing. What does this .com mean? What does www mean? This is just way too complicated. Now we can't live without it. Okay, it's and I believe that when aging does get cured, the generations, the 30s, the 20s, the 50s that David was just talking about, they're going to come up with the solutions. I have confidence in them. And but if there was 100 years after we cure aging, if somebody put something on the ballot that said, let's ban the cure for aging, it would never win. Nobody would want to go back to what we have now. So, you know, I think let's keep a choice. And kind of like in a sad way, one solution to the problem that of people that are very opposed to curing aging is that we won't have them around after everybody else cures their aging. And so the pessimism against it will be decreased just by natural selection, I guess. So yeah, that's all the comments I have.
Yes, well, there is indeed a selection dynamic in our favor, especially if we succeed in this quest to defeat aging. We have some interesting comments in the chat. Jason Geringer writes, Elon could be manipulated through flattery. So Elon Musk, you're a great guy, highly innovative in everything you do, everything you take seriously. So perhaps it's time for you to take longevity seriously and become a thought leader in favor of the cause of longevity. And you can start by signing the Dublin Longevity Declaration. Well, at least this is the first try at flattery. So thank you, Jason. Mike Lazine says, tell Elon Musk that if more people can live longer, then more people can travel to Mars on his SpaceX rockets. Yes, I think that would help. And then John H. writes, Elon would probably be perplexed at being described as pro-death, as he recently posted his opposition to what he perceives as extinctionism. And John assumes by that he means the antinatalist community. But people not dying could also help prevent massive human population declines. And in many cases, in highly industrialized societies, many people choose not to have children, but as an alternative to them having children, you could keep them around longer in a youthful state. So I think these are all quite interesting comments and suggestions for how to address this. Now, Daniel Tweed has another interesting comment. He wonders if it's possible or desirable to seek signatures for the declaration from those who manage the estates of esteemed deceased people who in all likelihood would have signed if they could. I think technically it's possible to do that, but those executors of the estates should sign in their names and then as their affiliation state that they're the executor of the estate of such and such individual, and maybe they could publicly state that this person, had he or she lived long enough, would have supported the Dublin Longevity Declaration. So it's interesting to consider how many people would actually do that. And Carlos Nato also writes that Ray Kurzweil and Terry Grossman can make the declaration gain resonance. Were they invited to sign the declaration? Well, I think they will be. And Charlie is a good friend of Ray Kurzweil. Charlie, do you think that Ray Kurzweil, if he were informed of the declaration, would just sign it without hesitation? Or do you think he would need to be persuaded of something before signing it?
No, I think you know, he'll read it, and I think if I don't see why he wouldn't sign it. I mean, I'll, you know, especially when he sees the number of and the people that did sign it, that will help encourage him sign it. So I don't think there'll be a problem with that, and then that kind of leads right into someone like Martine, who respects Ray as well. Martine Rothblatt would then sign it. You know, I was thinking about Elon Musk. You know, maybe we can't get Elon, but we can get, you know, we can't get Coca-Cola. We can get Pepsi. In other words, we can get Bezos. You know, I mean, you know, here's the second richest guy, and he founded partly founded Altos Labs. So I would think he'd come on board. Let's try that one.
Yes, I think it wouldn't hurt to try. And Carlos Neto also writes, Bill Gates has shown interest in this area too. It would be nice to have his support. I think Bill Gates would need a bit more persuasion, because he did write in a Reddit AMA thread. AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. This was now close to a decade ago, where he thought that it was a bit selfish to pursue radical life extension while people in parts of the world were still lacking access to basic necessities. But I think if this becomes sufficiently mainstream, he might not be completely averse to signing it, but I would say probably not yet. And Mike Lazine asks about Warren Buffett. I would say the same in regard to Warren Buffett. I wouldn't rule it out, but I think we would need a lot of work before they consider signing such a document. Silver Fan suggests Bezos, Jeff Bezos, or Mark Zuckerberg. I think they would be more sympathetic, but then there's the matter of Altos Labs, because Altos Labs is funded by Jeff Bezos. At least that is the strong suspicion of everybody. But Altos does not call itself an anti-aging company. It actually issued a specific statement that Altos is not an anti-aging company. It is a cellular reprogramming company, as if cellular reprogramming is not an approach toward reversal of aging. But if anybody has insight as to where Bezos personally might be in terms of his outlook and how easy it might be to get him to sign. Aubrey, I know you've spoken with Jeff Bezos. So do you think that's a realistic possibility at some point?
Yeah, it's very hard to know. I mean, certainly when I was speaking to Jeff Bezos reasonably regularly, which was a decade ago or more, he seemed to be very on side. But you're quite right. It is paradoxical that he seems to have chosen not to associate himself too strongly in the public eye with Altos. And indeed, I'm sure he must be aware that the rumor that he is the source of the $3 billion that is the bulk of their money, is a very widely believed, and he hasn't gone out and denied it either. So I don't know really what he can be thinking right now. I'm perplexed.
Yes, it is a bit opaque, but hopefully his support is not out of the question either. And David writes, we should also consider Warren Buffett's long-term business partner, Charlie Munger, who will be 100 years old on January 1st, 2024. Perhaps some organizations within our community could even issue a statement essentially congratulating him on reaching that milestone and inviting him to sign the declaration in celebration of that fact. So I like that idea. Didier writes that Bill Gates gave quite a big amount of money for research concerning Alzheimer's disease 2 or 3 years ago, and that is not so far away from fighting aging. Of course, it is a disease-specific approach rather than the damage repair approach, but nonetheless, I do think Bill Gates cares about fighting disease and fighting suffering, and it's a matter of just shifting his perspective to recognize that aging is at the root of the vast majority of suffering due to disease. And perhaps, especially if enough other influential figures sign the declaration, he might be persuaded. And John H. responds to David, stating that Warren Buffett himself just turned 93 at the end of August. And it's interesting to consider as well, a lot of these high net worth individuals do have longer life expectancies than the majority of the population. So they have, to some extent, already benefited from the kinds of advances that hopefully are going to spread to the rest of the population. But of course, they're going to hit a wall as well in terms of the current maximum lifespan unless major breakthroughs are effectuated. David Wood writes, there was a super mini biography of the relationship between Buffett and Munger in the book Curable by Travis Christopherson. Thank you very much for that recommendation. And Bruce Davis wonders, what about Calico Labs? This has been a question within our community for a long time. What about Calico Labs? Does anybody have any new insights on Calico, which is a subsidiary of the Alphabet Group, and whether anybody from Calico at the very least could be reached and persuaded to sign the declaration?
Well, I did write to Cynthia Kenyon during the week or two before the launch of the declaration. She was one of the small number of people that we wrote to as, you know, distinguished, respected luminaries in the field, and she didn't reply.
Yes, well, that's unfortunate that she did not reply. Hopefully Calico doesn't have the same policy that Altos has of essentially discouraging its employees from signing these kinds of declarations, because Cynthia Kenyon's name would be quite nice to have on the list of signatories. And John H. writes that good genes and access to healthcare are the reasons why some of the super high net worth individuals tend to live longer. I would say in many of their situations, they just would have the ability to monitor health issues more closely. If you have many billions of dollars, of course, you're going to spend some substantial portion on your medical care, on making sure you get the best monitoring for your health conditions if you care about living longer. And in many cases, when people die, their deaths are actually preventable, at least in the near term. Like, it matters how quickly the response is if one has a heart attack, for example. It matters if you're in the emergency room, that you have access to a very competent medical team to do whatever it takes to revive you and repair the damage that occurred. David Wood also points out that Rochelle Buffenstein, who used to work at Calico, has signed the declaration, but he understands she is no longer working there. Mike Lazine wonders if someone like Kim Kardashian would sign the declaration. She seems pretty progressive. Now, I don't know very much about Kim Kardashian. If anybody does have any facts about her outlook on longevity, please let me know or make a comment in the chat. That might be interesting to consider. Jason wonders, can he embed the declaration page into the Transhuman Club website? Absolutely. Please go ahead and do that. And Jude McLean has an interesting question. I'll open this up to the panel. will healthcare and research ever be decentralized? I wonder if Jude means that there is a large degree of centralization and a kind of interdependence of researchers on large institutions. So is it possible that perhaps there could be smaller scale but higher impact research going forward, a kind of citizen science approach that could make substantial progress in the field? Or are we always going to rely on, say, billions of dollars given to large research institutions, especially when it comes to clinical trials, in order to make the kind of major progress that we need to realize the aspirations of the Dublin Longevity Declaration? Any thoughts on whether a kind of decentralized citizen science approach will work? David?
So there have been a lot of initiatives called DeSci or DeSci, decentralized science. Some are featured in recent Transhumanist Party virtual salons. They make the case that sometimes there are too many bottlenecks in the way that science is being researched and written up. There are bottlenecks and checkpoints which are there, sometimes for good reasons, but sometimes the old systems have just got too much stuck in their ways. And so indeed, there is scope for different access to funding, different ways in which research can be explored. I think there will still be things that will require a lot of funding, and it's hard to raise a lot of funding by these mechanisms. But let's look at what groups like VitaDAO are doing. Very encouraging work. There are other DAOs as well that have raised reasonable amounts of money and are encouraging research to take place that possibly couldn't have happened if it was gone through the old existing institutions. So I think there's a lot of scope for allowing thousands of flowers to bloom, but at the same time, we should be cooperating and sharing as much as possible. So rather than hiding the results in any sense, it's very much the vision of all these decentralized science initiatives to encourage transparency, encourage sharing of failures as well as successes, and rather than keeping things siloed off, it is, as Liz was saying earlier, Liz Parrish was saying earlier, there's much to be gained from sharing as much as possible and breaking down the silos in this field.
Yes, absolutely. And I am encouraged by the fact that, by and large, the longevity community remains primarily collaborative in its demeanor, in how various researchers approach one another's work. There's a lot less cutthroat behavior than even in some adjacent industries like pharmaceuticals or vaccination, where it seems like the major companies, the major figures often go after one another instead of acknowledging that they're working on shared objectives and would benefit from one another's success. Now, for anybody who wants to learn more about VitaDAO, which David mentioned, please watch our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon with Eleanor Davies. She is quite an articulate steward of VitaDAO, and she also delivered a great presentation at Longevity Summit Dublin. Now, interestingly enough, Didier also points out in the chat that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democratic representative from New York, has been working on C. elegans lifespan extension, and she studied that at university. I wonder how the world might have been different if she had decided to become a researcher instead of a politician, but there is an avenue there. So this is why we're a big tent at the U.S. Transhumanist Party. If some of our members who are more left progressive leaning have a way to reach out to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and communicate to her, one, their personal sympathies with her work, and two, a recollection that she's been involved in these kinds of scientific endeavors and asked her, would she consider signing the Dublin Longevity Declaration? I think she could be persuaded to do that, especially if the right people reach out to her. And John H. says, you rang? That's funny. Well, John, I hope that you can successfully reach out to her and persuade her. And Jason also suggests that he would talk to Alexandria. Well, I think the more people reach out to her as a politician, the likelier she is to respond. So now Sergio Terrero, our friend from Spain, who is the founder of Alianza Futurista, the political party that Jose Cordero actually informed me predated the U.S. Transhumanist Party in terms of its founding, writes that he will announce the signature of the Dublin Declaration by the Alianza Futurista leadership on its website and social media channels tomorrow. So thank you very much to Sergio for doing that. And also thank you very much to John H. for his generous contribution to our continued programming. Now we have a question for Aubrey. And after the question, we will entertain closing statements from our panel. Jude McLean wonders, does Aubrey think that AI will have any obvious impact on aging research? And he, well, Jude writes, Aubrey and company, so maybe others could chime in as well. But Aubrey, please go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, I don't think it's a matter of well. I think it's already having a major impact, really in two different ways. First of all, there is work going on that allows AI to have a major impact on biomedical research in general. So the most conspicuous example of this is certainly AlphaFold, the program that came out of DeepMind a couple of years ago and has more or less solved this thing called the protein folding problem, where you need to determine or predict the three-dimensional shape of a protein starting from its amino acid structure. There were, I mean, it wasn't a complete solution back then anyway, and we don't know precisely what state the program is in right now. It's no longer, they're no longer making the latest version public, as far as I'm aware. But you can be sure that progress has been made. And the natural next step, which I would bet my house they're working on, is to go the other way, to start off from a shape that you would like, in particular a shape of some particular part of a protein, like the active site of an enzyme, for example, and design a protein around that, and obviously therefore also the sequence, so as to give functions that are not found in nature. Or that are found but somehow one wants to alter them. This is definitely not science fiction anymore. So then that's one side. The other side is things that are specific to aging. So here you may start with a particular target, some kind of molecular target within aging that needs to be addressed with some drug, maybe inhibited, maybe activated. And you look at existing drugs, or indeed, new drugs that are potential candidates, and you find those candidates by using machine learning. Certainly, in silico medicine has had great success in identifying drugs that actually do work in the real world once they've been designed, and doing so in a small fraction of the time that it takes to do your typical, high throughput screen in the traditional way. So that's another example, and certainly we can expect quite a lot of that to happen within the biology of aging, simply because there are so many targets to go after.
Yes, indeed. And AlphaFold has been a major example of progress in AI contributing to longevity research. As John H. correctly points out, there used to be a dependence on distributed computing via the BOINC project to solve the protein folding problem, but it was very computationally intensive, and essentially hundreds of thousands of people ran these protein folding simulations using their spare computing time. I was one of them for many years. Actually, this was the reason why I chose not to mine Bitcoins back when they were still mineable around 2011, because I decided instead of solving some arbitrary mathematical problems without external significance, I would devote my spare computing resources to solving the protein folding problem. And well, history turned out the way that it did. But now people really don't have to do that anymore, because AlphaFold is just so much more powerful. Now, I also wanted to ask Bill Andrews if he had any thoughts on AI and its ability or potential to accelerate research into aging and potentially cures for biological aging.
Kind of, let's see,
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I have kind of a unusual opinion about AI, and that's that I took classes in AI in the mid 1970s, and it's really nothing new. AI is really just computers, machine learning, essentially, and it's been contributing to aging as long as I've been in the field of aging. So it's nothing new. So yeah, it is helping, but it's always been helping. It's just, we're just seeing AI get better as a function of Moore's law. And that's the only thing that's different. It's become a buzzword lately, but I think it's more a marketing thing than a real world thing. But yeah, of course, AI has always been contributing and always will to the whole field of anti-aging.
Yes, indeed. And let's hope that the dynamics of Moore's law continue to be operational, even if not through the exact same technological pathways, like increasing the number of chips that can fit into a particular area. But if there could be some other way to continue the progress and functionality going forward, I think that will bring great benefits to the longevity field. So we have about 7 minutes left in our salon today. So I'm going to invite closing comments at this time. So any final thoughts that any of our panelists would like to share? Let's start with Charlie Cam.
Okay, I think this has been a really good discussion, and we touched on a lot of good points about how to spread the idea of this and how to get more signatories. You pointed out Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. That's somebody I could reach out to as well, and Cory Booker, Pramila Jayapal. These people are pretty open-minded to this kind of discussion. But then you can go all the way to the other far right end of this political spectrum, and you've got someone like, and I don't know if he signed it yet, he might have, is Peter Thiel. I'm sure Aubrey knows him, and I can reach out to him as well. He's his whole goal is to not die. In fact, he's a cryonicist as well. So we've got all of those people to still continue to go after, and he's a billionaire, and he happens to be, by the way, the biggest private investor of all of Elon Musk's companies. So he might even be able to influence Elon in some way. And then there's other people that we can reach out to that I plan on going after. And I was going to talk to Aubrey about this, and I will. There's certain TV shows that we can get Aubrey on that will interview him. He can discuss this further. So there's just a lot of good stuff here. Somebody brought up a Kardashian. There's we barely brushed on that, but she's got so many followers and people like that, like Taylor Swift. They're not impossible to get to, and all you got to do is just explain it to them, and then they'll be on board. And I do know some people that have connections there. So let's see how this plays out. But I think this is going to be very interesting, and I look forward to moving forward on this.
Yes, thank you very much, Charlie. And Aubrey, it looks like you had something to say on the subject of Peter Thiel.
Oh, well, just that I completely agree. I haven't approached him yet, but I shall be doing so very soon.
Wonderful, wonderful. And also thank you to our friend Daniel Tweed for your generous contribution. And we have some interesting suggestions in the chat. Dan Elton points out that Newt Gingrich spoke with A4LI. He can also recommend Peter Attia. Carlos Nato pointed out that Yuval Noah Harari has quite a reach. So definitely a lot of high-profile individuals whom we could interest in the declaration. Now, let's hear from Art Ramon Garcia. Any closing comments?
Yes, I was sort of interested if Aubrey could maybe do a TED Talk or a TEDx, and if David Wood could re-engage with Richard Hart on the post airdrop. Any possibilities of doing this?
Well, so on TED, obviously it's been, I've given an awful lot of TEDx talks over the years. I haven't given any recently, but yeah, I'm always open to speaking invitations, and that's certainly part of it. The airdrop question, well, I actually did a podcast just this morning with a guy named Max from the Hex community, whose audience is mostly Hexicans, and gave a shout out to everybody. It turns out it's Richard Hart's birthday tomorrow, so I wished him a happy birthday. And certainly I encouraged everybody in that audience to sign up, as well as obviously to support LEV Foundation.
Yes, indeed. Happy birthday to Richard Hart. And let's hope that he gives himself the birthday present of signing the Dublin Longevity Declaration and accelerating the impact of this document. Daniel writes, if only I had kept up my Bitcoin mining in 2011, then I could fund the entire movement. Perhaps. Perhaps. But thank you for the thought, Daniel. So now let's go to Ben Ballweg, our Director of Longevity Outreach, for any closing remarks.
I started reading the book, How Big Things Get Done, this morning by Bent Flivbjerg and Dan Gardner. And if I learn anything, I'll share it with whoever might be able to help.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. Please do share any insights in this regard. And now let's go to David for closing comments.
One thing I really liked about this event is the variety of ideas for different outreach. It's not that we're just stuck with one or two ideas, which we're hoping people will pursue, but there's lots of possibilities. I've heard that the most popular Republican politician in America is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he has recently said that death is a terrible thing. And he has said, don't expect to wake up in an afterlife. There's no such afterlife. We've got to make the best of what we can do now. So there might be some outreach to him. There's sports people. There's a famous golfer called Bryson DeChambeau. He may not be familiar to many of the people on the call, but people who follow golf, and there's lots and lots of wealthy retired people who spend a lot of money on golf. And if somebody like Bryson DeChambeau has said he thinks it's possible to live to, I think he said 130, but that's what he hopes for, we should be reaching out to him as well. So let's pursue this varieties of ideas. And I'll just pick up one final comment that Jude McLean made, that some people might be put off by thinking, well, the current version of the declaration requires quite a high IQ. It's quite academic. It might put some people off. So I encourage the community to produce simplifications, summaries, not to bastardize it, not to completely change it, but in some sense just to highlight in your own ways what are some of the key messages. And that can be the lead in, and that can attract people's attention, and then they can be pointed over to the declaration to sign it. So let's use the variety, the diversity of this community to reach out in our own ways to a larger, diverse group and build on there. As somebody else said in the comments, if each person who signs persuades one other person to sign, guess what? It's Moore's Law again in a way. It's doubling and doubling and doubling. So in this sense, the Dublin Declaration may end up with a doubling of its signatures.
Indeed, let us hope for that outcome. Thank you, David. And Aubrey, we shall give you the last word. What would you like to tell our audience in 30 seconds?
Yeah, it's hard to add to what's been said. I mean, clearly, I very strongly agree with everything that other people have been saying. I think that the main thing that we must take away from today's discussion is it's all about momentum, that we need to be going out as energetically as we possibly can to persuade people to sign this up in as large numbers as we can. We must remember that the people who matter the most in that regard are people who can, hit that exponentiation button because of having a large audience of their own. So, that's really the thing. Everyone here needs to be thinking about who they know, who knows a lot of people, and who is listened to by a lot of people, and get this in front of them as quickly as we possibly can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aubrey. And Bill, in 10 seconds.
I want to support exactly what Aubrey just said. And in fact, the idea that only a dozen people have given reasons why they don't want to sign and 1,400 people have signed says distribution is the whole problem. And so figuring out a way to get this out to more people is the one thing that has to be figured out. And I don't know how to do it, but I'm sure some people know a lot better than I do. That's all I have.
Indeed. Well, distribution is the key, so let's get to distributing it. And in the meantime, let's all live long and prosper.